this world.
Hey there guys, Micah Curtis here, and welcome back to the 9th episode of the Comics Crusade, taking over the books for the second full week of August. So, as usual, I like to start these off by posing a question. And this week, what I would like to know from you, the audience, is what do you look for in a number one issue? Me personally, if I'm going to have a number one, what I mainly want from it is to properly set the tone for the rest of the series. I'm of the opinion that if you read the number one book, you should get an idea of where the comic is going for the foreseeable future. If it's humorous, then it's going to be humorous. If it's dark, it's going to be dark, so on and so forth. But, again, I'm the only one, and it will come into play a bit later on, trust me. So, tell me what you think. What do you expect in a number one? Do you expect it to have a ton of action to hook you out of the gate? Do you want it to be character focused? Do you want it to be a mix? What works for you? I want to know. And in fact, give me some good examples of number one issues. But give me the volume number so I know the one you're talking about. Alright, let's go ahead and get to the comics, and we're going to lead off with Catwoman number 2. God, Joelle Jones' art is just great, isn't it? This is one thing I want to talk about that's sort of flipping around from what's in the book and what is great about her art style. So, if you've never seen a picture of Joelle Jones, I will tell you this right now. She is an incredibly beautiful woman. As in, the type of woman that if you see a picture of her, you will stop and go, whoa, she's pretty. So, I sort of agree with diversity in comics that beautiful women aren't afraid to portray women as beautiful. At least I think that's what he said. But that's my logic, is that they're not afraid to do it, from my recollection. Because they see beauty as a positive. They don't think of it as some sort of unattainable thing. They see it every time that they look in the mirror. So, she is not afraid to portray Selina Kyle as sultry. And that is a very good descriptor, I think, for Selina in general. There's a 2-page spread of this book that would make a great computer wallpaper of just Selina from the back. And oddly enough, and this is one thing I really like about Joelle Jones, she doesn't proportion Selina in this sort of a crazy way where her hips are like a 54 and her bust is like a triple E or something like that. No, she has curve to her, absolutely. But she's not so crazily proportioned that you think that she would have constant back pain. And me personally, I kind of prefer that touch when it comes to women. Because I don't know if you've ever seen a woman with giant boobs try to run, but I'll be honest, I don't find that sexy. I find it hilarious because it just looks awkward. It's like they're just gynaxing back and forth. But anyway, point being is that her Selina is gorgeous, again, but does not come across like a woman that is a porn star or something. She looks like just a very, very beautiful woman. So, let's get into the story itself. We find that Catwoman catches up with the bunch of fake Catwomen, and you start to see exactly what's going on here, or at least some touch of it, in the sense that you get that this evil wife of a governor is trying to basically make Selina a scapegoat for murders, but the reasons for making her a scapegoat sort of are elusive. My only issue with this issue is that the villain so far comes across as one of those that's just sort of in it for evil, and we don't really know enough about her motivations. She's just kind of a bitch. And that is not a kind of weakness that I like to see in a Batman universe villain. At least unless there is some sort of a worldview that we're going to see from this character established in the near future. But then again, that's going to be the big challenge, I think, of Joelle Jones' run on Catwoman. If you're going to do a character in the Bat family, you have to be able to tell a story with a decent amount of depth. If she's able to pull it off, this run will be revered as incredible, to say the least. Her art is already great, but it's gonna need that depth going forward. I do recommend the issue, don't get me wrong. And I'm not just saying that because Joelle Jones is hot, but it's definitely a fun comic. It's definitely interesting as to where it could go. Pick it up, it's worth your $5. Alright, let's move on to Detective Comics number 986. So where we left off last time was Batman heading towards this new villain, or maybe one-shot villain called Karma, after realizing exactly who he was after Karma had stolen a bus full of children and then pulled a Frank Castle on a TV anchor in a rather gruesome scene. Why people still live in Gotham is beyond me. But anyway, this particular ending to the arc is not bad. Not in any sense of the word. But it does kind of miss something. So there is this question that was posed by the writer, Brian Edward Hill, about whether or not Batman's allies make him weaker. Now, I would think that the action throughout the story would really give us a conclusion to what Bruce thinks about that statement, but we don't really get it. If anything, it answers it for the audience, but for some reason, it's going to possibly be a question that lingers with Bruce himself. So I'm hoping, judging by the last page especially, that we are going to see a bit of character evolution in Bruce going forward, but I don't know how long Brian Edward Hill is on this book. I've heard it's just for this arc, or maybe 2 arcs. I've heard contradicting things, and I admittedly have not done enough research, so that's my own fault. Needless to say, though, the book is good, especially as an action story. But I feel that it could have been better. I feel like it could have examined Bruce a little closer, but on the other hand, it kind of seems like, again, Brian Edward Hill is looking to make a more action-oriented Batman story as opposed to Tom King's more cerebral run on the main Batman book. So, again, if you've enjoyed this arc so far, I definitely say pick it up, if for no other reason than the fact that it concludes, but there's a little bit of room for disappointment there, so just a fair warning. I had fun with it, but you might not. Now, for Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps number 50. So Ivan Reis returns to do the art on this issue, and of course it's Ivan, so it looks good. And the story largely revolves around the fight between Hal and Tomar 2 as they argue about philosophy relating to justice. And I really love this about superhero comics, because you can really do both at the same time very well. In fact, last week we saw that really well with Christopher Priest's Deathstroke between Deathstroke and Batman. And this is something that I really feel should be reiterated. I'm working on a video where I re-examine the DCEU, specifically Man of Steel. And one thing that I have enjoyed about re-examining it is a debate that comes up in my head of what really makes a hero. And beyond that, should certain heroes kill? Or would it make sense for them to kill? And I enjoy that particular question because it's one that you have to consider a bunch of layers on. And they go through some of these layers in this book in a great way. And what justice is and how you can discern it from vengeance, or whether or not it and vengeance are the same thing. Or really, would it be a better thing for just about any criminal that comes around to just put 2 in their head and call it a day? It's an interesting debate to have. Needless to say, it's a great book. It ends on a high note on top of that, which I'm not going to spoil for you. But it's just another great chapter in the Green Lantern mythos, right after the stellar run by Jeff Johns years ago. So, this is one of those things that as this run concludes, I recommend every single issue in it if you can pick it up. Hopefully there will be an omnibus in the near future. The unfortunate thing about all of it as I read that final piece was that, well, Grant Morrison's going to be on the book, and he's going to shit it all up. So, it was fun while it lasted. Definitely recommend this comic. Red Hood and the Outlaws number 25 is next on the docket, and this was a sad story. And oddly enough, it seems to be a running theme this week that this is an end of an era. So, Jason Todd, in the last issue, shot Penguin in the face. And on top of that, everything for the Outlaws was falling apart. Their base above Gotham was starting to self-destruct because Bizarro has lost his superintelligence from some issues prior to this. And Artemis is left trying to deal with that. Jason, of course, thinks that Penguin sent his father to his death, so he is, of course, taking it out on him and does so with lethal force. There's a fight between Batman and Jason here, and it's sad to see. Because it comes across like Bruce is losing his son again, but in a different way. There was a thought that Jason could redeem himself. There's a thought that Jason could stop with the lethal way of doing things. There was this thought that Jason was going to forge something truly greater with these two friends, and it really feels like the rug has just been ripped out from under him. He's out of Gotham. He's not the same person he was before, and now he's going to have to rethink the whole thing. With issue 26, the book is, I think, just going to be called Red Hood, and it's going to probably take a much darker turn. And I think that it's just going to be sad to see. Not in quality, mind you. This is a good comic. Like every single issue of this Scott Lobdell run has been good. So, needless to say, pick it up. It's enjoyable. Dexter Soy does the art on it. He's been probably one of my favorite Bat Family artists in a long time. And I don't think he's on the book from here on out, so I'm kind of bummed out about that. So hopefully he's going to be able to pick up good work after this. Hopefully on another Bat title. Needless to say, though, just to repeat myself, great book. Pick it up once you get the chance. And I'm interested to see where Scott Lobdell is going to take things from here. Hopefully not in some cringy, grimdark route, but I'm going to keep an open mind. Alright, let's move on to Superman number 2. So the comic book opens up with Rogal Zar taking on the Zamarins, and the Zamarins are scared because Rogal Zar is really scary, even though he's been shown to not really be that scary, aside from being a murderer, which that seems to be the only card that Brian Michael Bendis ever really plays anymore. Still, after the pointless opening, we actually get another second opening, where Bendis has this long monologue from Superman that perfectly explains Superman's worldview. If I were, oddly enough, to explain to someone who Superman is, I would read these opening pages, which basically shows Superman doing what Superman does with his worldview laid out to bear in front of everyone. I was shocked when I read these pages. Absolutely shocked. Because it really felt like that Brian Michael Bendis that I enjoyed all those years ago when he started on Daredevil and when he wrote Alias. He's still kind of in there. That maybe, just maybe, he can turn this around and I won't have to do the whole because Bendis meme anymore. Because Lord knows I can't put it on a t-shirt because I would probably get sued. But, you want to know what happens next? Brian Michael Bendis doesn't properly explain anything. Because Bendis. Brian Michael Bendis brings back Nuke, or whatever he's called, the clone Superman, and kills him off. Why? Because Brian Michael Bendis likes to kill old characters because Bendis. Rogal Zarth says that he's going to go get an army. Why is he going to go get an army? I don't know. You want to know why I don't know? Because Bendis. Not much else happens aside from that. The Earth is screwed up because Phantom Zone, and scene. Yeah, the comic book just stops abruptly. Also, why is Batman talking about his bowels? Why would Batman ever talk about that? Why is Flash not written like Barry Allen? Why is he a redhead? Barry Allen's not a redhead. Is it meant to be Wally? If so, why is Wally in Barry's costume? Wally doesn't talk this way either. It's like that Brian Michael Bendis just watched the Justice League movie and thought that that's how Barry is portrayed. Sorry, no. Justice League sucked. It got Barry very, very wrong, mostly because Barry's not a coward and not that much of a dork. There's terrible characterization, Nothing of note outside of those few splash pages where we get Superman's worldview laid bare is really interesting about this book. This comic blows. Why? Because Bendis. I can't even get that angry about it. Apathy is starting to set in. Don't buy this book. Don't buy any Bendis comic at this point. Don't encourage him. Let's move on. I'm done with the DC stuff, so we're going to move on to Marvel with Amazing Spider-Man number 3. Alright, so one thing I really like about how Nick Spencer writes Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson is that they're not written like they're slobbering all over each other, but they're written like two people who have been in a relationship for a long time and are at that point in the relationship that everybody secretly desires but they won't say out loud. The best friends stage. Being somebody who's been there myself, best feeling in the world. But they're very casual with one another. They're very open with one another. They're, constantly close to one another, but they joke around. You can tell that they are more comfortable next to one another than with anyone else in the freaking universe. And it's great. It is great to see. After all these years about fucking Quesada saying that these two cannot be an item, we finally get them back together again, and oddly enough, Nick Spencer fucking gets it. Now, here's the thing. I'm taking Nick Spencer on a comic-by-comic basis at this point. He could end up redeeming himself after turning Captain America into Captain White Guilt, but regardless, the way he's doing this is quite well. Now, so, concept for this issue is that Spider-Man and Peter Parker have been separated into two different people. Not a clone, but somehow just separated. It's not really explained that well, in my opinion. The science is really soft, but think of it like this. Do you remember way back in the days of the Hulk, I think before Peter David took over the book, where Bruce Banner and the Hulk were separated? It's kind of like that, where it's basically aspects of a personality split into two completely different human beings. So you've got Spider-Man running around with all the spider powers, doing Spider-Man things, and then you have Peter Parker being the skinny nerd, doing Peter Parker things. Now, the problem with it, of course, is that all the morality and all the lessons from Uncle Ben and stuff like that, and the intelligence and such, are all in Peter, not Spidey. And so we find ourselves with an unethical Spider-Man and an ethical Peter Parker as two completely different people. And it hints that there could be some crazy trouble in the future, to say the least. Overall, good comic. Still love Ryan Ottley's art. He is, in my opinion, again, the one guy who should be on this book for years on end. Give him this book until he doesn't want it anymore. Needless to say, great comic. If you're not subscribed to it, I can't really blame you, but this issue was stinking good. Champions 23 is what's next on our list, and I'll say right now that I will always pop for the Man Thing. Especially the giant-sized Man Thing. Anyway, it was really cool seeing this character show up. Obviously, there's not really a lot really revealed as to why he's here, and spoilers, it's just not revealed at all in this comic just yet. But I have a feeling it will get there at some point, probably the next issue. Anyway, I want to say something about this new character, Snowguard. I like the idea. Here's the reason why. I'm an old school Alpha Flight fan. And in a sense, Amka is a character that's another figure in this sort of Canadian/far north mysticism that was present in the old Alpha Flight books. So I've always found that sort of thing kind of interesting. The Wendigo, you've got the shaman character, so on and so forth. There were different members of Alpha Flight that were mystical in one way or another. And it had a very distinct feel to it, and it kind of feels like it's wrapped up in one character. So, needless to say, I dig it. And also, there's a part of this where Vivian is having to address sort of her inner self. It's basically her emotional core, and for some reason it gave me Evangelion vibes, and I'm a big Evangelion fan, so I dig that too. And I might be reading too much into something, but it seems to me like Jim Zub writes Riri Williams like an autistic savant, and that's a good thing. And no, I'm not saying like autistic is an insult. I'm saying that if she were 110% Rain Man, it would make total sense. It would make absolute sense. Why would she have such a silly idea about conquering a country? Why would she treat it so lightly? Autistic. Why would she think that the key to becoming great was to get stepped on by her teacher over race? Autistic. These sorts of things would make more sense of her being a hero if she was autistic. Because if she's not, she's kind of a sociopath. But it honestly seems like Jim Zub is leaning in that direction. I don't know if it's a conscious thing, but I think it's a good way to do it. That's for sure. And not to mention, I like that Jim Zub is taking things in a team-building direction, with Master of the World possibly being the first actual nemesis for a lot of these characters. Because you have to keep in mind, a lot of these are part of the SJW crew, and the big problem with those is that they didn't have any nemesis. Nemesis? Anyway, do me a favor. Name the current Miss Marvel's arch nemesis. Exactly. So, needless to say, I really enjoyed Champions 23. It's a fun little book. Not super amazing, but still fun to read. I'm enjoying it for what it is. Basically, again, trying to be the Teen Titans of Marvel. Hunt for Wolverine, Adamantium Agenda 4 is next on the docket, and yes, I am completing this damn event. Because if you're going to make this many comics about Wolverine coming back, they damn well better be good. This one's not, by the way. Tom Taylor, as a writer, is the kind of guy who thinks he's funny, and people tell him personally that he's funny all the time so they don't hurt his feelings, but he's not funny. You ever met that kind of a guy? And maybe I'm that guy. I don't frickin' know. But I will say this. This dude ain't funny. He doesn't make me laugh. The way that he puts jokes together is really, really jilted. It just doesn't feel good to read. It's just cringy. Bad attempts at internet humor. It's like his memes are like 3 years behind. I mean, naming a character Honey Badger? Are you fucking serious? Anyway, there's one issue with Tom Taylor that I have. He is good with concept. He's actually very good with concept. If he were to pitch you on a story, I have no reason to think you would not be sold on it. Especially if it's one with a really good concept. This one in particular, the idea of Wolverine's DNA being auctioned off to the highest bidder. The problem with him is that he is terrible in execution. Because he has no sense of pace, he has no sense of dialogue, he has no sense of anything. There's a good moment here between Tony and Wolverine where Wolverine points out a really interesting character flaw of Tony Stark. But ultimately, it is wasted because the end of the book is a whole nothing burger. He retcons Laura's background to not being a clone but Wolverine's actual daughter for reasons yet unknown. And oddly enough, the last few pages of the book make it so that the comic itself made really no sense and had little to nothing to do with Wolverine in general, aside from the conversation that he and Tony had, which you could have just put in one comic. Fuck this book. Fuck Tom Taylor. Don't buy it. Fantastic Four #1. On an outer space adventure, they were hit by cosmic rays, and the Four were changed forever in some most fantastic ways. No need to fear, they're here. Just call the Four, and you'll open this book and find only 2 of them. So, sorry, I felt the need to do the prose of the old Fantastic Four cartoon intro there. But needless to say, let's get through the positives of this book because there's a big negative to it just in concept that needs to be mentioned. So, Dan Slott seems to get Ben Grimm. And I'm a fan of Ben Grimm, one of my favorite heroes ever. That's important to me. Real quick art gripe, why does Crystal right here look like a dude? Anyway, so Ben Grimm is basically the lead character of this particular story, telling old stories about the FF after some kid in the Yancey Street gang finds the old flare gun and uses it to make everybody think that the Fantastic Four is back. And Dan Slott does a lot of selling of the Fantastic Four as this great comic team, which they should be regarded as, because they're one of my favorites at least. And the story that is told for the background of the character has a great ending in it, and on top of that, we finally get Ben doing one thing he should have done years ago, and I'm not going to spoil it for you. The story's not bad, and on top of that, there's part of this comic devoted to bringing back Doctor Doom as the ruler of Latveria and as a freaking tyrant, because I'll be honest, the whole Doctor Doom as a hero thing sort of played its way out, and he just looked weird with the naked freaking Iron Man costume. Infamous Iron Man, oddly enough, was a decent series, but still. I'm just glad the experiment's done. It didn't really resonate as much as they probably thought it would. So here's the thing about this comic. It's a good, heartfelt story. And it would have an amazing ending if this was an issue 0. And that seems to be the common complaint with a lot of people, except for the ones that are just like super angry about it because it's just Dan Slott. But again, this feels like an issue 0. It probably should have been an issue 0, but it doesn't really set the tone properly. I don't know what kind of a comic book this is going to be going forward. I just don't know. There's no real indication. So I'm just disappointed in it overall. I think that, by and large, if I was to read a comic book like this, and I'm told that this is how the whole series was going to go, I'd be like, well, this is a nice little self-contained thing, but this isn't something I want to buy on a monthly basis, and that's the fatal flaw. So, oddly enough, I didn't mind it, but I can't recommend buying it, because if this is how the series is going to go forward, I don't know if it's going to be something I'm going to want to read from month to month. Sorry. Alright folks, this brings us to the end of this week's Comics Crusade. If you enjoyed this particular episode, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to answer my question earlier. What really makes a number 1 issue for you as the reader? What makes it important? What do you want to see in it? Let me know. Anyway, guys, I'm going to take off, and I'll see you next week. But until that time, my name is Micah Curtis. Welcome to my crusade. Deus Vult.